Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video we are going to start actually practicing creating data associations using MongoDB. We're going to set up a little practice directory, a little practice project, and then we're going to actually do the thing so that you can get your hands dirty. Make sure you are coding along as always because you're not going to remember it or learn it hardly at all if you don't. So first off, we are going to go ahead and make directory week 11 and cd into week 11, and there should be nothing there, and there's not. So I'm going to go ahead and make another directory. I'll just call it practice, and this is where we're going to put our data association practice. So now I'm inside of week 11 and inside of the practice folder. So I want to get a new app.js, touch app.js, and then let's open that up. And step one is going to be to actually install Mongoose, because we've got to have that. So npm I mongoose. I'll be right back once that finishes installing. All right, Mongoose is done, so we can go ahead and start using it. So first we have to import it. Const mongoose equals require mongoose. So step number one is to create the model, and we're just going to do a similar model to what they did in the Mongoose documentation with a user and some addresses. So let's go ahead and create a little bit of structure using comments to our code. So we're going to create models, and then after we create our models, we're going to execute commands, we'll say. So this is where we're actually going to create the things. So first we're going to create a model, and this model is going to be of a user. So const user schema equals new mongoose.schema, and it's important that S is capital on the mongoose schema. And we're just going to have a couple pieces of data on this object. We're going to have a username, and it's going to be a string, and then we're going to have a full name, which is also going to be a string. And that's all we're going to need. So now that we have a schema, we need to go ahead and convert it into a model. So const user equals mongoose.model, and you tell it the singular user, and then user schema. So again, what this is doing is this is taking the user schema that we've set up here, that we've defined up there, and it's passing it into mongoose.model, and it will save it to this constant user, which is a class called a model. So now that we have that, let's actually go ahead and create a user. Actually, let's go ahead and run it first and make sure it works. Node app.js. There we go, no errors, so I didn't typo anything. So let's go ahead and create one. User.create, and we got to pass in the information. Username, test1, and then full name, I don't know, Paul Atreides. I think I spelled that right. Anyway, so now we have a user, and then remember for the users, after we do that, we need to pass a then, which is going to take a function, and in that function will be passed, if it's successful, the new thing, so new user. So all I want to do is console.log new user. But then if there's a problem, catch, and catch will be passed the error. I just want to console.log error. And really, I could put all of this on one line there. There we go. So right here, we are creating a new user. Then after that user is created, we're going to just console.log that user. And if there's an error, we're just going to console.log the error. So let's save and run this again. There it goes. I never connected to my database. Derp. So we have to connect to the MongoDB database. Hopefully some of you figured that out before I did. Mongoose.connect, and you pass the connection string. I'm just going to copy my config file over. Actually, I'll just point to it because that's easier. Const config equals require, and now let's figure out where we are. We're in 11 inside of practice, so we need to go up. That'll get us in 11. Then we need to go up again, which will get us into CS 330. Then we need to go into week 10, and then we need to go into Yelp comics, and then finally we can go get config.js. So let's connect to, what did we call it? I'm just going to copy this. There we go, mongoose.connect, config.db.connection, and then we pass in this boilerplate right there. Let's save and try it again and see if it works. See if I did my pathing right. Yay, it did. All right. So you can see right here, we console.logged this information right here. We got the username test1, full name Paul Atreides, and now let's go log into our MongoDB Atlas and see if it worked. So I'm here in my MongoDB Atlas. Let's click on Collections. And we have a users. Right here, test1 and Paul Atreides. So now we have created inside of here, test1 Paul Atreides. Yay, so it worked. Excellent. But that's not really surprising because we're not doing anything new. This is all stuff we've already done before. So next, let's go ahead and create an address. So we've got our user schema up there, const address schema equals new mongoose.schema. And we're just going to have a street, which is a string, a city, which is a string, a state, which is a string, and a zip, which is a string. Notice that zip codes are almost always stored as strings, not as numbers, because you don't do numerical things with them. You don't add or subtract them or sort them by numerical order or anything like that. You generally just treat them as strings. So that's why zip codes should be and are almost always stored as strings. Just a little bit free tip there for you. And now we got to create a model from this, so const address equals mongoose.model address, that's the singular name of whatever the thing we're making, and then address schema. So now we are creating that. Let's go ahead and shut our server down there. And then let's go ahead and come down here and create a new address. Address.create. Let's pass in some information. So street will be 123 any street. City will be New York. State is going to be NY. Zip is going to be 12345 because I don't know any of them. And before we actually run this, we're going to comment out this user part because we already have a user. We don't want to create a new one. So let's run this. Looks like it worked, but I forgot to do my then and my catch, so we never got a callback. Let's see if it worked real quick, just to test. Yep, we got addresses, and it's right there, so it worked. So let's go ahead and fill in the then and whatnot, but we don't have to actually run it again. Then new address console.log new address catch. All right, so now we've got an address, but right now, neither of these things are related to each other. We've got addresses with that address in there, and we have users with that user in there, but neither of them are related. So remember, the first way we could do this is embedding. To embed it, we would not need this address string or a model or anything at all because we're not going to have an addresses. And instead, we're simply going to add addresses up here, and it's going to be an array of objects, and on that object you're going to have various things such as a street, which is a string, a city, which is a string, a state, which is a string, and a zip, which is a string. Notice that this is important, that we are structuring the schema the same way that our actual items will be structured. So we're updating our user schema, and then down here when we create our user, let's see, right here, user.create, we need to update this as well. And we're simply going to include addresses, which is an array of objects, and the first object is going to have a street of, and then I'm just going to copy this because I'm lazy. Uncomment those. There we go. So we've got one address here. So let's come into our MongoDB, and we're actually just going to delete our user. Let's delete our address as well, just to keep things as clean as possible. So we've still got these collections, but there's nothing in them. Query results of 0. So now we're saving this. Let's see if it works. Looks like it did. We got back username, full name, and addresses. And the addresses, you'll notice, each have an ID as well. So we got street, city, state, zip. Inside of here, let's look at users. And we've got it, and you've got this addresses array that's collapsed, and then you have the first object, and there's the information on it. It is important to note that by default, MongoDB will add an object onto here, onto any objects you put inside of arrays that are inside other documents. That way you can refer to them if you need to. That's just kind of a nice quality of life thing it adds. If we wanted to, we could add a second address onto here. I'm just going to copy all this and replace the information. Oops. Let's call this 300 East College Avenue, Hartsville, SC 9550. And let's delete this user because we don't want to be confused by having the same user in there twice. So save, close, and rerun. Now we have a user with 2 addresses. On this array, we have 2 objects. The first one is the any street, the second one is the College Avenue. So you can see here, this is one way to do it. As mentioned in the previous video, this is a good way to do it if you've got data here that is going to be relatively small and not likely to change. However, if you've got data here that is going to either be very large or is going to change frequently, you don't want to embed things because you want to not update things whenever possible. You don't want to be updating your items that are already in there if you can help it. Obviously, there are times that you're going to, but the fewer times you can do that, the better off you're going to be. And also, if you have a bunch of data, then anytime you call this person, you're just going to crap ton of data back. So this is good for small, simple data that is not likely to change. If any of those things are not true, then you need to go about it a different way. So we're going to get rid of the addresses on here, and we're going to go back to the other way where we actually had an address in a separate collection. And we also need to get rid of this. So we've got it back to kind of how it was. I'm going to delete this as well. So now we have no users, and we have no addresses. So now we need to talk about the way that you define relationships inside of your schemas. To do this, let's say that we wanted to have a user here with multiple addresses, and we wanted to put the addresses inside of. We wanted to refer to the addresses inside of here. To do that, you would simply create that addresses again, and you would have an array of items. So the first one would be type schema.types.object ID, and then the reference would be to addresses. What this is doing is it is saying that this is an array of items. The items are going to be addresses, and we're going to refer to them by their object ID. Schema.types.object ID is a type of data, is a data type. So that's just something you have to kind of memorize. Schema.types.object ID will be the type if you are referring to object IDs, which you 99.9 repeating % of the time will. The reference here, this is important, it's called REF. It has to be called REF. You cannot name that something else, just like you cannot name type something else. And it needs to be the singular of whatever you're referring to. So now that we have that, we're going to create a, down here in our user, we're going to have to add the addresses back on. But right now it's just going to be an empty array because we don't know what the object IDs are going to be when we create them down here. We could if we wanted to, but we just don't right now. So this is going to be an empty array. Put a little bit of space in here to make it a little bit more clear. So up here at the top, we are creating our user schema, and we are adding the addresses onto an array. The address schema is right here. We're not doing anything special with that. And then when we were executing it, our addresses array is empty. So let's save this, make sure I did. In here, I think I've already deleted everything. Yes, I did. So let's run it again. And one thing I forgot to do is I have to do mongoose.schema. It's because schema variable has never been defined, but schema is a value on Mongoose. So let's save that and do node app.js. Let's see if it works. It should. We've got first our user, which is username, full name, and addresses. And then we've got our address created right there. And what you would do at this point, now that you've got the addresses empty array right there, is that as addresses are added, you would get their IDs and put them into this addresses array. We haven't really talked about how you can update things inside of MongoDB. So until we do, let's just go ahead and do that inside of Atlas. So we've got users, and right now we have the addresses array is empty. There's nothing in there. So let's go ahead and get the ID right here. Copy. Let's get this and move into edit mode. So I want an array. And I want to add something, add array element. And it's just going to be a paste. And then update. And what this does is this creates an association. Now, whenever I need to find all of the addresses associated with this user, I have their IDs, and I can find them that way. Another way we could do this, for example, if instead of addresses we had comments or something like that, that is likely to change, we would not actually put that inside of the user schema, because again, you don't want to be updating things frequently. Instead, you would do kind of the opposite, where you would create a comments, kind of like addresses, and then inside of there, you would put an item that's like maybe user. And you would talk about, it would put the ID for the user in there. And that would be mongoose.schema.types.object.id. I believe that's the, yeah. So you'd put that in there, and this would just be the object ID of the user that you create. So that's the other way that you would do it. I understand if this is a little bit confusing right now, and it's going to be likely for most of you until we actually start adding it to our true project. The main reason I created this video was to show you the syntax of how to do it, specifically this right here. The fact that whenever you're creating relationships, you can't just put a string of IDs. You have to actually put an object with a type and a reference. That's the important part. Even though when you create it, you're going to be putting strings of IDs in there. That is what you need. This tells Mongoose, hey, this is the type, and this is the collection that you're referencing. So in further videos, in the next videos, we're going to start adding data associations to our Yelp comics or our Yelp clone site. And at that point, I think the rubber's really going to hit the road, and it's really going to kind of solidify. So if you're still a little bit confused and you still don't quite understand this, that's not a big deal. That's completely normal. Don't worry. The next few videos will hopefully make it concrete for you. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to help. Thanks.